The red Georgia clay clung to everything at Fort Benning, painting the world in dusty crimson as Staff Sergeant Maria Valdez adjusted her pack straps for the third time that morning. The weight distribution felt wrong, but then again, everything about this assignment felt wrong. Around her, the other members of Alpha Company's reconnaissance team moved with the easy confidence of soldiers who belonged, their conversations punctuated by the kind of casual profanity that came with years of shared hardship. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maria kept her distance, checking and rechecking her equipment with a methodical precision that had kept her alive through 3 deployments. Her radio was tuned to the correct frequencies, her night vision goggles cleaned and calibrated, her medical kit organized according to trauma priority rather than alphabetical order. Every piece of gear had been inspected twice, because she knew that when things went sideways, preparation was the only thing standing between survival and disaster. Staff Sergeant Tommy Briggs shouldered his rifle with practiced ease, the weapon looking almost small in his massive hands. He'd been with the 75th Ranger Regiment for 8 years, long enough to have opinions about everything and the rank to voice them. His voice carried across the staging area as he addressed the assembled team, each word delivered with the authority of someone who'd never questioned his place in the hierarchy. All right, Rangers. Today's infiltration exercise is straightforward reconnaissance and extraction. We insert at grid reference 247 to 394, establish overwatch position, and monitor the target compound for 12 hours. Intelligence suggests minimal security presence, so this should be a walk in the park. His eyes swept across the team, pausing briefly on Maria before continuing. Standard operating procedures apply. No unnecessary risks, no cowboy bullshit, and absolutely no deviations from the mission parameters. The briefing tent was thick with the smell of canvas and gun oil, a familiar combination that had followed Maria through every deployment since she'd earned her Ranger tab 4 years earlier. She'd been one of only 3 women to complete the program that year, a statistic that everyone seemed eager to remind her of whenever she walked into a room. The achievement had opened doors, but it had also painted a target on her back that seemed to grow larger with each assignment. Sergeant First Class Jake Morrison leaned against a equipment crate, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture that suggested both boredom and skepticism. He'd made his opinion of female Rangers clear during previous missions, not through open hostility, but through the kind of subtle dismissal that was harder to confront than outright prejudice. "Hope everyone's ready for a long day of sitting still and looking professional," he said, earning chuckles from several team members. "Last thing we need is someone getting jumpy and compromising the mission." Maria felt the weight of unspoken expectations settle around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She'd heard variations of this speech before, usually delivered with just enough plausible deniability to make confrontation impossible. The message was always the same: prove you belong, but don't try too hard. Be competent, but not so competent that you make anyone uncomfortable. Succeed, but do it quietly enough that no one has to acknowledge what your success might mean for their assumptions about capability and gender. The mission parameters were indeed straightforward, at least on paper. The target compound was a suspected training facility located in the mountains of northern Afghanistan, a collection of buildings that intelligence analysts believed might be housing weapons caches or serving as a way station for high-value targets moving through the region. Alpha Company's job was to establish visual confirmation of activities within the compound and gather intelligence that could support future operations. What the mission briefing hadn't mentioned, and what Maria had discovered through her own research, was that the compound's location made it nearly impossible to approach without being detected. The terrain was open and exposed, offering minimal cover for a reconnaissance team. The local population was known to be sympathetic to insurgent forces, which meant that any foreign presence would likely be reported within hours of insertion. Most concerning of all, recent intercepted communications suggested that the compound's security posture had been significantly upgraded following several coalition raids in adjacent provinces. Maria had compiled this information into a detailed analysis, complete with alternative approach routes and recommendations for enhanced surveillance protocols. The document was thorough, professional, and completely ignored by the mission planners, who seemed more interested in maintaining their predetermined timeline than in adapting to changing conditions on the ground. Her suggestions had been acknowledged with the kind of polite dismissal that military bureaucracy had perfected over decades of institutional inertia. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was loud and uncomfortable, the aircraft's rotors beating a steady rhythm that made conversation impossible. Maria used the time to review her mental checklist, running through contingency plans and emergency procedures with the same methodical approach she brought to every aspect of her military service. Around her, the other team members dozed or stared out the windows at the passing landscape, their relaxed postures suggesting a confidence that she envied but couldn't share. Specialist Danny Chen sat across from her, his youth evident despite the veteran's 1,000-yard stare he'd been cultivating since his second deployment. At 19, he was the youngest member of the team and the most eager to prove himself worthy of the Ranger tab he'd earned 6 months earlier. His equipment was immaculate, his uniform perfectly pressed even after hours in the field, and his attention to Maria's movements suggested a respect that the senior NCOs seemed reluctant to acknowledge. The insertion went smoothly, with the team fast roping into a landing zone that offered good concealment and multiple escape routes. Maria was the third person down the rope, her descent controlled and efficient despite the 40-pound pack that threw off her center of gravity. The moment her boots touched Afghan soil, she was moving toward the designated rally point, her rifle ready, and her senses attuned to any signs of enemy presence. The terrain was exactly as brutal as the topographic maps had suggested. Loose scree and rocky outcroppings made silent movement nearly impossible, while the sparse vegetation offered minimal concealment from aerial observation. Maria found herself questioning the mission planner's decision to insert during daylight hours, but she kept her concerns to herself as the team began the 3-kilometer movement toward their overwatch position. Briggs set a punishing pace that seemed designed more to test the team's endurance than to maintain operational security. Maria kept up without complaint, her conditioning honed through years of training that had pushed her physical capabilities far beyond what most people thought possible for someone of her size. At 5 feet 4 inches and 130 pounds, she was smaller than every other member of the team, but her strength-to-weight ratio was superior to most of her colleagues. The overwatch position was a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility of the target compound, while offering reasonable concealment from ground-based observation. Maria immediately began establishing fields of fire and identifying potential escape routes, her tactical training taking precedence over the fatigue that was beginning to accumulate in her legs and shoulders. The compound spread out below them like a detailed map, its buildings and defensive positions clearly visible through her high-powered optics. What she saw through her scope made her stomach tighten with concern. The intelligence briefing had described a lightly defended facility with minimal security presence, but the reality was significantly different. Guard towers that hadn't appeared in the satellite imagery were clearly visible at each corner of the compound. Armed sentries moved in coordinated patterns that suggested professional military training rather than the casual vigilance of civilian security forces. Most troubling of all, the compound's defensive positions appeared to be oriented outward, as if the occupants were expecting an attack from exactly the direction Alpha Company had chosen for their approach. Maria keyed her radio twice, the signal indicating that she had important information to relay. Briggs's voice crackled through her earpiece, impatient and distracted. "What is it, Valdez? We're supposed to be maintaining radio silence unless there's an emergency." "Sergeant, the compound security posture is significantly different from what we were briefed. I'm counting at least 12 armed personnel in defensive positions, and their patrol patterns suggest they're expecting contact from our direction." Maria kept her voice low and professional, but the urgency of her observations came through clearly. There was a pause before Briggs responded, his tone carrying the kind of dismissive authority that Maria had learned to recognize and endure. "Valdez, we've been watching this place for 30 minutes. I see a couple of guards walking around, nothing that looks like a serious threat. Maybe you should adjust your optics and try to get a clearer picture." The suggestion stung because it implied that Maria's observations were the result of equipment failure or operator error rather than tactical assessment. She'd spent more time behind a scope than most of the team members, and her ability to read terrain and identify threats had been proven during multiple deployments. But challenging Briggs's assessment would require her to contradict a senior NCO in front of the entire team, a career-limiting move that could undermine her credibility for years to come. Instead, she continued her surveillance, documenting the compound's defensive positions and tracking the movement patterns of the guards she could observe. Her field notebook filled with sketches and observations that painted a picture of a facility that was far more secure and well-defended than anyone had anticipated. The guards moved with military precision, their weapons were modern and well-maintained, and their communication protocols suggested a level of organization that went far beyond what intelligence had predicted. As the hours passed, Maria's concerns deepened. The compound wasn't just more heavily defended than expected. It appeared to be serving as some kind of command center or logistics hub. Vehicles came and went at regular intervals, their occupants moving with the urgency of people conducting important business. Communications antennas that hadn't been visible in the initial intelligence reports suggested sophisticated electronic capabilities that could pose a serious threat to coalition forces operating in the region. Chen had positioned himself near Maria's observation post, his own scope trained on a different section of the compound. His youth made him eager to learn, and he'd been asking questions about surveillance techniques and threat identification throughout the deployment. "Staff Sergeant, are you seeing those antennas on the main building? They weren't in any of the imagery we reviewed during the briefing." Maria nodded, grateful that at least one member of the team was paying attention to details that seemed to escape the senior leadership. "Good eye, Chen. Those are military-grade communication arrays, probably capable of intercept and jamming operations. That makes this facility a much higher priority target than we were told." The intelligence implications were significant. If the compound was serving as a communications hub for insurgent forces in the region, then its value extended far beyond simple weapons storage or personnel training. The facility could be coordinating attacks against coalition forces, intercepting military communications, or serving as a command center for a much larger network of hostile activities. Maria's attempt to share this assessment with Briggs met with the same dismissive response she'd received earlier. The senior NCO seemed more interested in maintaining the mission timeline than in adapting to new information, and his body language suggested that he viewed her observations as an unwelcome complication rather than valuable intelligence. Morrison had spent most of the day alternating between boredom and irritation, his attention focused more on his watch than on the compound below. "How much longer are we supposed to sit here staring at a bunch of mud huts? I've seen more activity at a retirement home." The comment revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what they were observing, but Maria knew better than to correct him directly. Instead, she continued her methodical documentation, building a comprehensive picture of the compound's activities and defensive capabilities that would be invaluable for future operations, assuming anyone bothered to read her reports. The afternoon brought increased activity within the compound, with vehicles arriving and departing at intervals that suggested some kind of scheduled event or planned operation. Maria tracked each movement, noting the types of vehicles, the number of occupants, and the apparent urgency of their activities. The pattern that emerged was concerning. This looked like preparation for a significant operation, possibly an attack against coalition forces or Afghan government targets. Her attempts to share this assessment with the team leadership continued to meet with resistance. Briggs seemed determined to complete the mission according to the original parameters, regardless of what they were actually observing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. His attitude reflected a broader institutional tendency to prioritize adherence to plans over adaptation to changing circumstances, a mindset that had cost lives during previous deployments. As evening approached, Maria made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. The compound below was clearly preparing for some kind of operation, and the intelligence they were gathering was too important to be dismissed or minimized. If the chain of command wouldn't listen to her observations through normal channels, then she would have to find another way to ensure that critical information reached the people who could act on it. The radio in her pack was capable of reaching higher headquarters directly, bypassing the team's command structure, and delivering her intelligence assessment to analysts who might better understand its implications. Using this capability without authorization would be a serious breach of protocol, but allowing a potential threat to go unreported could cost coalition lives. Maria began composing a detailed intelligence report in her head, organizing her observations into the format that higher headquarters would expect. Vehicle movements, personnel counts, defensive positions, communications capabilities, and behavioral patterns that suggested imminent hostile activity. The information was solid, actionable, and desperately needed by forces operating throughout the region. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the compound and making observation more difficult. Maria switched to her night vision equipment, continuing her surveillance even as the other team members began preparing for the extraction that was scheduled for midnight. Her commitment to the mission went beyond following orders. It extended to ensuring that valuable intelligence wasn't lost due to institutional blindness or personal prejudice. The darkness that settled over the Afghan mountains brought with it a clarity that daylight had obscured. Maria's night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green and gray, transforming the compound below into a tableau of electronic surveillance that revealed patterns invisible to the naked eye. What she saw through her enhanced optics made her blood run cold with recognition and dread. The compound wasn't preparing for a defensive operation or routine logistics movement. The vehicles that had been arriving throughout the day were positioning themselves for departure, their cargo areas loaded with equipment that she now recognized as improvised explosive devices and weapons caches. The personnel moving through the facility weren't guards or administrators. They were fighters preparing for a coordinated attack that could devastate coalition forces operating in the region. Maria's experience with insurgent tactics allowed her to read the signs that others might miss. The timing of vehicle movements, the distribution of personnel, the communication patterns she'd observed throughout the day all pointed to an imminent offensive operation. Her best estimate suggested that the attack would be launched within the next 12 to 18 hours, giving coalition forces a narrow window to prepare defensive measures or launch preemptive strikes. Chen had noticed her increased attention to the compound's activities, and his whispered question carried a concern that matched her own growing alarm. "Staff Sergeant, something's different down there. The movement patterns have changed since sunset." Maria nodded grimly, appreciating his observational skills even as she struggled with the implications of what they were witnessing. "You're right, Chen. This isn't a routine facility. We're watching the final preparations for a major offensive operation." The intelligence breakthrough came when Maria managed to intercept fragments of radio communications emanating from the compound's communications center. Her Arabic language skills, honed through years of deployment and intelligence training, allowed her to piece together enough information to understand the scope of what was being planned. The target wasn't a single coalition outpost or Afghan government facility. It was a coordinated series of attacks designed to cripple military operations throughout the province. Briggs was checking his watch again, his attention focused on the extraction timeline rather than the developing intelligence picture. "Another 4 hours and we're out of here. Hope everyone's ready for a long flight back to base." The casual dismissal of their surveillance mission reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what intelligence gathering was supposed to accomplish. Maria realized that Briggs viewed their 12-hour observation period as a bureaucratic requirement, rather than an opportunity to develop actionable intelligence that could save lives and disrupt enemy operations. Morrison had grown increasingly restless as the night wore on, his movements becoming careless and noisy in ways that compromised the team's concealment. "This is the most boring mission I've ever been on. 12 hours of watching people walk around and load trucks. We could have gotten this intelligence from a satellite." The comment revealed a dangerous ignorance about the limitations of technical intelligence collection and the value of human observation. Satellites couldn't intercept radio communications, identify behavioral patterns, or assess the tactical implications of observed activities. The intelligence that Maria had gathered throughout the day was irreplaceable and time-sensitive, but it would be worthless if no one was willing to act on it. Maria made her second critical decision of the deployment. The radio equipment in her pack was powerful enough to reach the forward operating base, where higher headquarters maintained their intelligence fusion center. A direct communication with the analysts there would bypass the team's chain of command, but it would also ensure that critical intelligence reached the people who could act on it immediately. The process of establishing secure communication with higher headquarters required technical skills that Maria had developed during specialized training that most Rangers never received. Her background in signals intelligence and her clearance for compartmented information gave her access to communication protocols that were beyond the scope of the standard reconnaissance mission they were supposedly conducting. The intelligence analyst who answered her encrypted transmission was Staff Sergeant Rachel Montgomery, a signals intelligence specialist who understood the value of tactical observations and the urgency that came with time-sensitive intelligence. "Falcon Base, this is Overwatch 7. I have priority intelligence regarding imminent hostile operations in Grid Square 247 to 394. Montgomery's response was immediate and professional. "Overwatch 7, this is Falcon Base. We're ready to receive your intelligence. Please proceed with your report." Maria began transmitting the comprehensive intelligence assessment she'd been developing throughout the day, organizing her observations into the format that would allow rapid analysis and dissemination to tactical units. Vehicle movements, personnel counts, intercepted communications, and behavioral patterns that indicated an imminent large-scale attack against coalition forces. The transmission took 12 minutes to complete, during which Maria provided details that painted a picture of a sophisticated enemy operation that posed a significant threat to military installations throughout the region. Her assessment included specific recommendations for defensive measures and potential targets for preemptive strikes that could disrupt the planned attacks. Montgomery's response confirmed what Maria had suspected about the intelligence value of their observations. Overwatch 7, your intelligence correlates with signals intelligence we've been developing over the past week. This appears to be the final phase of an operation we've been tracking. Your ground truth confirmation is exactly what we needed to authorize immediate response. The validation of her intelligence assessment was gratifying, but Maria knew that her unauthorized communication with higher headquarters would have serious consequences when Briggs discovered what she'd done. Military protocol required all communications to flow through the established chain of command, and her decision to bypass that system would be viewed as insubordination regardless of the intelligence value of her actions. Briggs discovered the unauthorized transmission when he noticed the extended antenna configuration on Maria's radio equipment. His reaction was immediate and furious, his voice carrying across the observation post in a harsh whisper that conveyed both anger and disbelief. "Valdez, what the hell are you doing with that radio? We're supposed to be maintaining communication security." Maria met his gaze steadily, knowing that her explanation would either justify her actions or end her career. "Sergeant, I established contact with higher headquarters to report time-sensitive intelligence regarding an imminent enemy operation. The compound below is the staging area for a coordinated attack against coalition forces." The explanation did nothing to mollify Briggs's anger, and his response revealed the depth of his frustration with what he viewed as unauthorized action by a subordinate. "You had no authority to make that transmission. Our mission parameters specifically prohibit independent communication with higher headquarters. You've compromised our operational security and violated direct orders." Morrison's reaction was equally hostile, his voice carrying the kind of personal animosity that Maria had learned to recognize and endure. "I knew this would happen eventually. Give someone too much authority and they start thinking they can make their own rules. This is exactly why integration is such a bad idea." The comment was carefully crafted to maintain plausible deniability while delivering a message about gender and military service that was impossible to confront directly. Maria had heard variations of this sentiment throughout her career, usually delivered in contexts that made response impossible or inadvisable. Chen's position near Maria's observation post had given him a clear view of the intelligence she'd been gathering, and his support for her actions reflected an understanding of what they'd actually observed. Staff Sergeant Valdez has been tracking increased activity all day. The compound is definitely preparing for some kind of operation. His attempt to validate Maria's assessment was dismissed by both Briggs and Morrison, who seemed more concerned with maintaining their authority than with evaluating the intelligence value of what had been observed. The institutional dynamics that govern military decision-making often prioritized hierarchy over accuracy, creating situations where valuable information was ignored because it came from the wrong source. The radio transmission from higher headquarters that interrupted their argument changed everything. Montgomery's voice crackled through the communication system with an urgency that commanded immediate attention. "All units in Sector 7, this is Falcon Base with immediate intelligence. Large-scale enemy operation confirmed for Grid Square 247 to 394. All coalition forces implement ThreatCon Charlie immediately." The confirmation of Maria's intelligence assessment from higher headquarters created an awkward moment of recognition that her unauthorized communication had provided critical warning to forces throughout the region. Briggs's expression shifted from anger to uncertainty as he processed the implications of the intelligence that Maria had developed and transmitted. Morrison's response was characteristically dismissive, his tone suggesting that the confirmation was somehow coincidental rather than the result of Maria's analytical capabilities. "Lucky guess. Even a broken clock is right twice a day." The comment was designed to minimize Maria's contribution to what was clearly a significant intelligence breakthrough, but Chen's reaction suggested that at least one member of the team understood the value of what had been accomplished. "Staff Sergeant, How did you know what to look for? I was watching the same compound and didn't see any of those patterns. Maria's explanation of threat pattern recognition and behavioral analysis revealed training and experience that went far beyond what most Rangers received during their standard military education. Her background in intelligence analysis and her multiple deployments had provided skills that were invaluable for exactly the kind of complex observation mission they were conducting. The extraction helicopter was still 4 hours away, but the intelligence Maria had transmitted was already producing results throughout the region. Radio traffic indicated that coalition forces were implementing defensive measures based on her threat assessment, and reconnaissance aircraft were being deployed to track the vehicles that had been observed departing the compound. Briggs found himself in the uncomfortable position of having his mission assessment contradicted by both his subordinate and higher headquarters. His authority had been undermined by Maria's independent action, but the intelligence value of that action was undeniable. The conflict between maintaining command structure and acknowledging tactical reality created a tension that would define the remainder of their deployment. The compound below continued its preparations for departure, with the final vehicles beginning to move toward the exit routes that Maria had been tracking throughout the day. Her intelligence assessment had provided coalition forces with advance warning of a major enemy operation, but the success of her unauthorized action had also created a career-threatening confrontation with her immediate supervisor. As the night progressed, radio reports confirmed that Maria's intelligence had enabled coalition forces to disrupt the planned attacks before they could be launched. Airstrikes against vehicle convoys and raids against staging areas had prevented what could have been a devastating blow against military installations throughout the province. The success of the intelligence operation vindicated Maria's decision to bypass the chain of command, but it also highlighted the institutional barriers that often prevented valuable information from reaching the people who could act on it. Her career would be defined by this moment of choice between following procedures and saving lives. The extraction helicopter appeared on the horizon exactly on schedule, its rotors beating a familiar rhythm that signaled the end of their surveillance mission. Maria began packing her equipment with the methodical precision that characterized all of her actions, knowing that the real challenge would begin when they returned to base, and she had to account for her unauthorized actions. Chen approached her as they prepared for extraction, his voice carrying a respect that was notably absent from the senior NCO's interactions with her. "Staff Sergeant, I wanted to thank you for what you did tonight. That intelligence probably saved a lot of lives." The acknowledgement meant more to Maria than any official recognition could have, because it came from someone who had witnessed her work and understood its value. Regardless of what happened during the inevitable investigation, she knew that she had done the right thing under circumstances that made right action difficult and dangerous. The helicopter ride back to base was tense and silent, with each member of the team processing the events of the past 12 hours in their own way. Maria stared out the window at the passing landscape, knowing that her military career had reached a turning point that would determine everything that followed. She had chosen mission accomplishment over personal safety, intelligence value over procedural compliance, and saving lives over protecting her career. The consequences of that choice would unfold over the coming days and weeks, but Maria felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had used her skills and training to prevent a significant loss of life. The compound below had been neutralized as a threat, coalition forces had been warned of impending attacks, and enemy operations had been disrupted because one soldier had been willing to risk everything to do her job correctly. As the helicopter approached the forward operating base, Maria could see the unusual level of activity that suggested her intelligence had triggered significant military operations throughout the region. The success of those operations would be measured in lives saved and attacks prevented, outcomes that justified her decision to act independently when the situation demanded immediate action. The landing at the forward operating base marked the beginning of a new chapter in Maria's military career, one that would be defined by her willingness to prioritize mission accomplishment over personal advancement. The investigation that would follow would examine every aspect of her actions, but the results of those actions spoke for themselves in the form of successful defensive operations and disrupted enemy plans. Maria's story was just beginning, but the foundation had been established through 12 hours of meticulous observation, accurate analysis, and courageous action under pressure. The young woman who had been dismissed and underestimated had proven herself capable of intelligence work that saved lives and disrupted enemy operations at the highest level. The real test would come in the days ahead, when she would have to defend her actions before commanders who valued institutional order above tactical innovation. But Maria had already proven the most important thing. When lives were at stake and time was running out, she could be trusted to do the right thing regardless of the personal cost. The fluorescent lights in the detention facility cast harsh shadows across the concrete walls, creating an atmosphere of institutional coldness that matched the temperature of Maria's reception at Forward Operating Base Apache. She had been escorted directly from the landing pad to a sterile holding room, where she now sat facing a metal table and 2 empty chairs, waiting for what she knew would be the most important conversation of her military career. Major Patricia Hendricks entered the room with the measured stride of an officer who had conducted hundreds of similar interviews, her uniform pressed to perfection, and her expression carefully neutral. Behind her walked Captain David Torres, a military intelligence officer whose presence suggested that this investigation would examine not just Maria's breach of protocol, but the intelligence value of her unauthorized actions. The preliminary questioning lasted 3 hours, during which Maria provided a detailed account of every observation, decision, and action she had taken during the surveillance mission. Major Hendricks asked probing questions about her training, her authorization to use encrypted communication equipment, and her understanding of the chain of command protocols that governed reconnaissance operations. Maria answered each question with clinical precision, providing facts without editorial commentary or attempts at self-justification. She had learned early in her military career that investigations proceeded more smoothly when subjects focused on what had happened rather than why they believed their actions were justified. The facts would speak for themselves, assuming anyone was willing to listen to them objectively. Captain Torres seemed more interested in the intelligence methodology Maria had employed than in the procedural violations she had committed. His questions revealed an understanding of tactical analysis that was notably absent from the initial mission briefing, and his attention to technical details suggested that he grasped the significance of what she had accomplished during the surveillance operation. The interrogation revealed information that Maria had not been provided during the mission briefing. The compound she had observed was indeed a high-value target that had been under surveillance by multiple intelligence agencies for several months. Her ground truth observations had provided confirmation of activities that had previously been detected only through technical means, giving coalition forces the verification they needed to authorize immediate military action. Major Hendricks explained that Maria's intelligence had triggered Operation Desert Hawk, a coordinated series of airstrikes and raids that had disrupted insurgent operations throughout the province. The attacks that Maria had identified as imminent had been prevented, and several high-value targets had been captured during follow-up operations based on her tactical assessments. The success of the military operations that had resulted from her intelligence work created a complex situation for the investigation. Maria had clearly violated established protocols and defied direct orders from her immediate supervisor, but those violations had produced intelligence that saved coalition lives and disrupted enemy operations at a strategic level. Captain Torres reviewed the intelligence reports that Maria had transmitted, his expression indicating professional appreciation for the quality and accuracy of her analytical work. The tactical assessments she had provided had proven correct in every significant detail, from vehicle movement patterns to communication capabilities to the timing of planned offensive operations. The institutional challenge facing the investigation was how to balance the need for military discipline against the recognition that Maria's unauthorized actions had achieved exactly what the reconnaissance mission was supposed to accomplish. Her breach of protocol had been deliberate and undeniable, but it had also prevented attacks that could have killed dozens of coalition personnel. Major Hendricks addressed this dilemma directly, her tone reflecting the complexity of the situation they were all facing. Staff Sergeant Valdez, your intelligence work during this mission was exceptional by any measure. Your analysis was accurate, your reporting was comprehensive, and your tactical recommendations proved invaluable for follow-up operations. However, your decision to bypass the established chain of command represents a serious breach of military discipline that cannot be ignored. Maria understood the position that Major Hendricks was describing. The military justice system was designed to maintain order and discipline within a hierarchical organization, and allowing subordinates to act independently, regardless of the outcomes, would undermine the authority structure that made effective military operations possible. Captain Torres offered a different perspective that reflected the intelligence community's appreciation for accurate and timely reporting. Staff Sergeant, from a pure intelligence standpoint, your work during this mission represents exactly the kind of tactical analysis that saves lives and disrupts enemy operations. The question we're facing is how to balance the value of that intelligence against the procedural violations that were necessary to obtain it. The investigation continued for 2 days, during which Maria was interviewed by officers from multiple commands who were trying to understand the circumstances that had led to her unauthorized actions. Each interview revealed additional information about the broader context of the mission and the intelligence value of what she had accomplished. Colonel James Morrison, the base commander, met with Maria personally to discuss the implications of her actions for future reconnaissance operations. His questions focused on the systemic issues that had prevented her observations from being properly evaluated through normal channels, and his interest in her tactical methodology suggested that he understood the broader lessons that could be learned from the incident. The colonel's perspective on the situation was notably different from that of the junior officers who had conducted the initial investigation. His experience with complex military operations had given him an appreciation for the kind of split-second decision-making that Maria had demonstrated, and his questions suggested that he was looking for ways to prevent similar communication breakdowns in future missions. Maria learned during these interviews that Staff Sergeant Briggs was also under investigation for his handling of the reconnaissance mission. His failure to properly evaluate the intelligence that Maria had developed, and his refusal to allow her to report time-sensitive information through appropriate channels, had contributed to the communication breakdown that necessitated her unauthorized actions. The investigation revealed that Briggs had received multiple warnings during previous deployments about his tendency to dismiss input from subordinates and his reluctance to adapt mission parameters based on changing battlefield conditions. His handling of Maria's intelligence assessments fit a pattern of behavior that had been documented but not adequately addressed by his chain of command. Specialist Chen was interviewed extensively about his observations during the surveillance mission, and his testimony provided important corroboration for Maria's account of events. His description of the compound's activities and the timing of vehicle movements matched Maria's intelligence reports in every significant detail, providing independent verification of her analytical accuracy. Chen's interview also revealed the extent to which Maria had been sharing her tactical knowledge with junior members of the team, providing informal training in threat recognition and intelligence analysis that went far beyond what was required by her position. His respect for her expertise was evident in his testimony, and his account of her mentoring activities painted a picture of a leader who was committed to developing the capabilities of her subordinates. The investigation uncovered communication records that supported Maria's account of the events leading up to her unauthorized transmission. Radio logs showed that she had attempted multiple times to share her observations with Briggs, and that those attempts had been dismissed or ignored despite the growing evidence of enemy activity within the compound. Technical analysis of the intercepted communications that Maria had reported revealed information that had been missed by electronic surveillance systems. Her language skills and cultural knowledge had allowed her to understand context and nuance that automated translation systems could not capture, providing intelligence that was unavailable through purely technical means. The Intelligence Fusion Center confirmed that Maria's reports had provided critical confirmation of enemy activities that had been detected through other means, but not yet verified through human observation. Her ground truth intelligence had been the final piece of information needed to authorize the military operations that prevented the planned insurgent attacks. Major General Sarah Mitchell, the regional intelligence commander, requested a personal briefing from Maria about her analytical methodology and the training that had prepared her for the kind of tactical assessment she had conducted during the surveillance mission. The general's interest in Maria's work suggested that the investigation was examining not just her individual actions, but the broader implications for intelligence operations throughout the theater. During the briefing with General Mitchell, Maria explained the threat pattern recognition techniques she had developed during multiple deployments, and the cultural and linguistic training that had enhanced her ability to interpret enemy activities. Her presentation was detailed and professional, demonstrating expertise that extended far beyond what would normally be expected from a staff sergeant in a reconnaissance unit. General Mitchell's questions revealed an understanding of intelligence operations that allowed her to appreciate the full scope of what Maria had accomplished during the surveillance mission. Her interest in Maria's training background and analytical capabilities suggested that the investigation might result in expanded opportunities rather than purely punitive measures. The psychological evaluation that was conducted as part of the investigation found no evidence of instability or poor judgment in Maria's decision-making process. The military psychologist who interviewed her concluded that her actions had been the result of sound tactical analysis and appropriate concern for coalition forces, rather than emotional reactions or personal grievances. The evaluation also revealed the extent to which Maria had been dealing with institutional pressures related to her gender and her position as one of the few female Rangers in the regiment. The psychologist's report documented patterns of dismissal and marginalization that had been affecting her ability to contribute effectively to team operations, despite her superior qualifications and experience. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Weber, the regimental commander, reviewed all aspects of the investigation before making his final determination about disciplinary action. His decision would establish important precedents for how the military handled situations where following procedures conflicted with mission accomplishment and the protection of coalition lives. The evidence presented during the investigation painted a complex picture of an exceptional soldier who had been placed in an impossible situation by institutional failures and poor leadership. Maria's actions had been unauthorized and contrary to established protocols, but they had also achieved the primary objectives of the reconnaissance mission while preventing significant loss of life. Colonel Weber's analysis of the situation focused on the systemic issues that had created the conditions necessitating Maria's unauthorized actions. The failure of the mission planning process to accurately assess the threat environment, the breakdown in communication between tactical units and higher headquarters, and the refusal of immediate supervisors to properly evaluate time-sensitive intelligence had all contributed to the crisis. The colonel's decision reflected an understanding that effective military operations required both discipline and adaptability, and that rigid adherence to procedures could sometimes conflict with mission accomplishment. His recommendation would balance the need to maintain order and authority with recognition of exceptional performance under extraordinary circumstances. Maria spent the week following her interviews in administrative limbo, assigned to temporary duties that kept her busy while the investigation reached its conclusion. She organized equipment inventories, updated training records, and assisted with routine administrative tasks that allowed her to remain productive while avoiding any situations that might compromise the ongoing investigation. The temporary assignment also gave her an opportunity to observe the broader impact of Operation Desert Hawk on military operations throughout the region. The successful disruption of insurgent activities had reduced attack frequencies against coalition forces, and intelligence gathered during follow-up operations was providing valuable information about enemy networks and capabilities. Staff Sergeant Montgomery from the Intelligence Fusion Center visited Maria during this period to provide additional details about how her tactical assessments had been integrated into the broader intelligence picture. The ground truth verification she had provided had enhanced the accuracy of technical intelligence and improved the military's understanding of insurgent operations in the region. Montgomery explained that Maria's analytical methodology was being studied by intelligence professionals throughout the theater as an example of effective tactical assessment under challenging conditions. Her ability to recognize threat patterns and interpret behavioral indicators had provided insights that were being incorporated into training programs for reconnaissance teams across multiple units. The conversation with Montgomery revealed that Maria's unauthorized communication had been received and processed by intelligence analysts who understood its value immediately. The 12-minute transmission had provided more actionable intelligence about the compound than months of technical surveillance had produced, demonstrating the continued importance of human observation in modern military operations. Chen visited Maria during her administrative assignment to express his gratitude for the mentoring she had provided during their deployment together. His understanding of intelligence analysis and threat recognition had been significantly enhanced by the informal training she had given him, and he credited her with preparing him for the kind of complex observations that had proven so valuable during the surveillance mission. The young specialist's visit also provided Maria with information about the team's reaction to the investigation and its findings. The success of Operation Desert Hawk had created a more complex narrative about her unauthorized actions, with some team members beginning to understand the intelligence value of what she had accomplished. Morrison remained hostile to Maria and dismissive of her contributions, his attitude reflecting a fundamental resistance to acknowledging that his initial assessment of the situation had been wrong. His comments to other team members revealed a determination to minimize the significance of her intelligence work and to maintain that her actions had been inappropriate regardless of their outcomes. Briggs had been noticeably absent from base operations during the investigation, and rumors suggested that he was facing significant disciplinary action for his failure to properly evaluate and report the intelligence that Maria had developed. His career appeared to be in jeopardy as a result of leadership failures that had been documented during multiple deployments. The final phase of the investigation included interviews with intelligence analysts and military commanders who had acted on the information that Maria had provided. Their testimonies painted a unanimous picture of exceptional intelligence work that had provided critical warning of enemy operations and enabled successful defensive measures. Colonel Mitchell personally reviewed Maria's intelligence reports and analytical methodology, comparing her work to products generated by much larger intelligence organizations with significantly greater resources. Her assessment concluded that Maria's tactical analysis had been superior to institutional intelligence products in both accuracy and timeliness. The investigation's final report documented not only Maria's unauthorized actions, but the systemic failures that had made those actions necessary. The breakdown in communication between tactical units and higher headquarters, the failure of immediate supervisors to properly evaluate intelligence, and the inadequacy of mission planning had all contributed to creating a situation where following procedures would have resulted in preventable loss of life. Maria received notification that Colonel Weber wanted to meet with her personally to discuss the investigation's findings and his recommendations for resolution. The meeting would determine whether her military career would continue, and whether her actions would be viewed as a model for future operations or as a cautionary example of the dangers of unauthorized initiative. The walk to Colonel Weber's office felt longer than any patrol Maria had ever conducted, each step carrying the weight of 4 years of military service and the uncertainty of what would follow. She had done what she believed was right under circumstances that made right action difficult and dangerous, but the institutional response to her choices would determine whether that decision had been worth the personal cost. The colonel's office was spartanly decorated, with maps and operational charts covering most of the available wall space. Weber himself was a compact man with graying hair and the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades in operational assignments. His expression was unreadable as Maria entered and took the seat he indicated across from his desk. The conversation that followed would reshape Maria's understanding of military leadership and her place within the institutional structure she had served for years. Colonel Weber's perspective on her actions and their implications would determine not just her immediate future, but the broader question of how the military would balance discipline with effectiveness in an increasingly complex operational environment. Maria sat at attention, her uniform pressed and her bearing professional, prepared to accept whatever consequences her choices had earned. She had acted according to her training and her conscience, and she was ready to defend those actions regardless of the personal cost. The investigation had revealed the full scope of what she had accomplished, but the final judgment would rest with the officer sitting across from her, whose decision would establish important precedents for military operations throughout the theater. Colonel Weber leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, as he studied the comprehensive files spread across his desk. The investigation report was thorough, documenting every aspect of Maria's actions during the surveillance mission and their far-reaching consequences. His weathered face revealed years of command decisions that had shaped careers and influenced operations across multiple theaters of conflict. "Staff Sergeant Valdez," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult choices under pressure. "This investigation has revealed a situation that challenges some fundamental assumptions about military operations and the balance between discipline and effectiveness." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the sterile office air. "Your unauthorized actions violated clear protocols and defied direct orders from your immediate supervisor. In any traditional analysis, those violations would warrant significant disciplinary measures." Maria maintained her posture at attention, her expression professionally neutral despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. She had prepared herself for various outcomes, from administrative punishment to separation from service, but the colonel's measured tone suggested a complexity she hadn't anticipated. Weber continued, his gaze shifting between Maria and the documents before him. "However, the intelligence you provided through that unauthorized communication prevented what would have been a devastating series of attacks against coalition forces. Our analysis indicates that your tactical assessment saved between 40 and 60 lives, disrupted a major insurgent operation, and provided intelligence that has enhanced our understanding of enemy capabilities throughout the region." The acknowledgement of her intelligence work's value brought a mixture of vindication and apprehension. Maria understood that recognition of success didn't necessarily eliminate consequences for the methods used to achieve it. Military justice often operated independently of operational outcomes, prioritizing institutional order over individual achievement. The investigation has also revealed systemic failures in our intelligence collection and dissemination processes, Weber said, his tone becoming more grave. Your immediate supervisor failed to properly evaluate time-sensitive intelligence, and our mission planning process failed to provide you with accurate threat assessments. These institutional shortcomings created the conditions that made your unauthorized actions seem necessary. The colonel stood and walked to the wall-mounted map that dominated one side of his office, his finger tracing the geographical features around the compound that had been the focus of Maria's surveillance. Staff Sergeant Briggs has been relieved of his leadership position and reassigned to administrative duties pending a separate investigation into his command performance. His failure to adapt to changing tactical conditions and his dismissal of subordinate input have been documented across multiple deployments. The news about Briggs surprised Maria, though she recognized that his leadership failures had extended far beyond their single mission. His reluctance to acknowledge intelligence that conflicted with preconceived notions had been evident throughout their deployment, and his treatment of her observations had reflected broader patterns of dismissive leadership that undermined unit effectiveness. Weber returned to his desk, his expression becoming more focused as he addressed the specific question of Maria's future. The decision I'm facing is whether to treat your actions as a disciplinary matter requiring punishment, or as an example of the kind of initiative and tactical expertise that our forces need in complex operational environments. The institutional dilemma was clear. Allowing subordinates to bypass chain-of-command protocols, regardless of their success, could undermine military discipline and create precedents that would be difficult to control. However, punishing exceptional intelligence work that had saved lives would send equally problematic messages about the military's priorities and values. General Mitchell has requested that you be transferred to the Regional Intelligence Center to work directly with analytical teams developing threat assessment protocols for reconnaissance operations, Weber explained. Your methodology for pattern recognition and tactical analysis has attracted attention from intelligence professionals throughout the theater. The transfer opportunity represented a dramatic shift from Maria's current assignment, moving her from tactical operations to strategic intelligence work that would utilize her analytical capabilities at a much higher level. The position would also remove her from the unit dynamics that had created friction during her current deployment. Weber pulled out a formal document from the file, his expression becoming more serious as he prepared to deliver his official decision. After extensive consultation with my chain of command and careful review of all evidence, I am issuing you a formal letter of reprimand for violation of communication protocols and failure to follow direct orders. The disciplinary action was significant but not career-ending, acknowledging her procedural violations while avoiding more severe punishment that would have effectively ended her military service. Maria accepted the decision without visible reaction, understanding that some form of accountability was necessary to maintain institutional order. However, Weber continued, I am also recommending you for the Army Commendation Medal for exceptional intelligence work that directly contributed to the success of Operation Desert Hawk and the prevention of significant coalition casualties. The simultaneous punishment and recognition reflected the complex nature of her actions and their consequences. The letter of reprimand would remain in her personnel file as a record of her disciplinary violation, while the commendation would acknowledge the operational value of her intelligence work. The transfer to the Regional Intelligence Center will take effect in 30 days, giving you time to complete your current assignment and transition your responsibilities to your replacement, Weber explained. Your new position will involve developing training protocols for reconnaissance teams and analytical methodologies for threat assessment in complex environments. The assignment represented an opportunity to influence military intelligence operations at a strategic level, applying the lessons learned from her tactical experience to improve the effectiveness of similar missions throughout the theater. Her work would help other soldiers avoid the communication breakdowns and leadership failures that had characterized her recent deployment. Maria's response was measured and professional, reflecting her understanding of both the opportunity and the responsibility that came with the new assignment. Thank you, sir. I accept the transfer and the accountability for my actions. I look forward to contributing to intelligence operations that can prevent similar communication failures in the future. Weber nodded approvingly, his expression suggesting respect for her professional response to a complex situation. Staff Sergeant, your actions during this deployment demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical thinking and moral courage that our forces need. The challenge is finding ways to channel that capability within institutional structures that maintain discipline while encouraging innovation. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, during which Weber outlined the broader implications of the investigation for military intelligence operations. Maria's case had become a catalyst for examining how reconnaissance teams reported time-sensitive intelligence and how higher headquarters processed tactical observations from ground-level units. The institutional changes that would result from her unauthorized actions included revised communication protocols that gave tactical units more direct access to intelligence analysts, modified mission planning processes that incorporated more detailed threat assessments, and enhanced training for reconnaissance team leaders on evaluating and reporting tactical intelligence. These changes represented a recognition that complex operational environments required adaptive responses that couldn't always be anticipated by standardized procedures. The military was slowly learning to balance institutional order with operational flexibility, though the process remained challenging and sometimes contradictory. Maria left Colonel Weber's office with a mixture of relief and anticipation. The investigation had concluded with consequences she could accept and opportunities that exceeded her expectations. Her unauthorized actions had been punished appropriately, while their operational value had been recognized and rewarded. The 30-day transition period allowed Maria to complete her responsibilities with Alpha Company while preparing for her new assignment at the Regional Intelligence Center. During this time, she worked closely with Chen and other junior soldiers to transfer the tactical knowledge and analytical techniques she had developed during multiple deployments. Chen's development as an intelligence analyst had been significantly enhanced by Maria's informal mentoring, and his appreciation for her teaching reflected the broader impact she had made on unit capabilities. Staff Sergeant, the pattern recognition techniques you taught me have completely changed how I approach surveillance missions. I'm seeing things now that I would have missed before. The mentoring relationship had been one of the most rewarding aspects of Maria's deployment, demonstrating her ability to develop subordinate capabilities while enhancing overall unit effectiveness. Her teaching skills would be valuable in her new assignment, where she would be developing training protocols for reconnaissance teams throughout the theater. Morrison's reaction to news of Maria's transfer and commendation was predictably hostile, his comments reflecting a continued refusal to acknowledge the value of her intelligence work or the appropriateness of the institutional response to her actions. His attitude remained an obstacle to unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. However, other team members had begun to reassess their initial judgments about Maria's capabilities and contributions. The success of Operation Desert Hawk and the recognition she had received from higher headquarters had created a more complex narrative about her role in the unit and her value as a tactical analyst. The preparation for her new assignment included extensive briefings with intelligence professionals who had studied her analytical methodology and tactical assessments. These discussions revealed the broader impact of her work on intelligence operations throughout the region and the lessons that were being incorporated into training programs. Captain Torres, who had been involved in the investigation, met with Maria to discuss the transition and her new responsibilities. His perspective on her intelligence work had been consistently positive, and his questions about her future plans suggested genuine professional interest in her development. Your analytical approach represents exactly the kind of tactical intelligence capability that we need to develop across all reconnaissance units, Torres explained. The training protocols you'll be developing will help other soldiers achieve the same level of threat recognition and pattern analysis that made your work so valuable. The conversation with Torres revealed the strategic importance of her new assignment and the expectation that her work would influence intelligence operations across multiple units and commands. Her tactical experience would be combined with formal analytical training to create capabilities that enhanced overall military effectiveness. Maria spent considerable time during the transition period documenting her analytical techniques and threat recognition methodologies in formats that could be used for training purposes. The documentation process forced her to articulate knowledge that had become intuitive through experience, creating resources that would benefit future reconnaissance teams. The formal training materials she developed included pattern recognition exercises, threat assessment matrices, and communication protocols that addressed the kind of intelligence reporting challenges she had faced during her recent deployment. These materials would become part of the standard curriculum for reconnaissance team training throughout the theater. General Mitchell visited the base during Maria's final week with Alpha Company to personally review her analytical work and discuss her upcoming assignment. The general's interest in Maria's development reflected the high-level attention that her case had attracted within the intelligence community. Your work has demonstrated capabilities that we need to replicate across our reconnaissance forces, Mitchell explained during their meeting. The intelligence you provided during a single 12-hour surveillance mission exceeded what much larger organizations have produced over months of technical collection. The general's assessment reinforced the significance of Maria's tactical intelligence work and the value of human observation in complementing technical surveillance capabilities. Her ability to interpret behavioral patterns and cultural context had provided insights that were unavailable through purely technological means. Mitchell also discussed the broader implications of Maria's case for military leadership and the treatment of exceptional performers who challenged institutional norms. Her unauthorized actions had created important precedents for balancing discipline with operational effectiveness, though the lessons were still being integrated into leadership training programs. The farewell gathering organized by Alpha Company was notably subdued, reflecting the complex dynamics that had characterized Maria's time with the unit. Chen and several other junior soldiers expressed a genuine appreciation for her mentoring and professional guidance, while the senior NCOs maintained their distance. The mixed reactions to her departure illustrated the institutional challenges that exceptional performers often faced in hierarchical organizations. Maria's capabilities had been simultaneously valued and resented, creating tensions that were difficult to resolve through normal personnel management approaches. Her final administrative tasks included completing after-action reports that documented lessons learned from the surveillance mission and recommendations for improving future reconnaissance operations. These reports would contribute to the institutional knowledge base that informed training and operational planning throughout the command. The transfer to the Regional Intelligence Center represented more than just a change of assignment. It marked a fundamental shift in Maria's military career from tactical operations to strategic intelligence work. Her new responsibilities would allow her to influence military effectiveness at a much broader scale, while utilizing the analytical capabilities that had made her exceptional as a reconnaissance soldier. The Intelligence Center was located at a larger base that housed multiple specialized units and advanced analytical capabilities. Maria's arrival coincided with increased attention to human intelligence collection and the integration of tactical observations with technical surveillance data. Colonel Sarah Armstrong, who directed the Intelligence Center's training division, met with Maria on her first day to outline her new responsibilities and the expectations for her performance in the strategic intelligence environment. Armstrong's background included extensive experience with special operations intelligence and an appreciation for the kind of tactical analysis that Maria had demonstrated. Your assignment here reflects recognition that tactical intelligence capabilities need to be developed more systematically across our reconnaissance forces, Armstrong explained. Your role will be to translate your field experience into training protocols that can be implemented throughout the theater. The new assignment included responsibility for developing analytical training programs, evaluating intelligence collection methodologies, and serving as a subject matter expert for reconnaissance operations planning. Maria's field experience would be combined with formal analytical training to create expertise that enhanced military intelligence capabilities. Her first major project involved analyzing the intelligence reporting processes used by reconnaissance teams throughout the region and identifying systemic improvements that could enhance the quality and timeliness of tactical intelligence. The project would examine communication protocols, analytical methodologies, and training requirements that affected intelligence operations. The research revealed patterns similar to what Maria had experienced during her deployment with Alpha Company. Reconnaissance teams frequently developed valuable intelligence that was poorly communicated to higher headquarters, and mission planning often failed to provide tactical units with adequate threat assessments for their operational environments. These systemic problems were contributing to intelligence gaps that affected military operations throughout the theater. Maria's assignment was to develop solutions that would improve intelligence flow between tactical units and strategic headquarters, while maintaining appropriate security and communication discipline. The training protocols she developed emphasized pattern recognition, behavioral analysis, and cultural context interpretation that enhanced the value of human observation in modern intelligence operations. The curriculum included practical exercises that taught reconnaissance soldiers to identify threat indicators and communicate their observations effectively. Maria's work attracted attention from intelligence professionals throughout the military community, and her analytical methodologies were being adapted for use by special operations units and conventional forces operating in similar environments. Her tactical experience was proving valuable for enhancing intelligence capabilities across multiple commands. 6 months after her transfer, Maria received notification that she had been selected for promotion to Sergeant First Class. Recognizing her exceptional performance in her new assignment and her contributions to intelligence operations throughout the theater. The promotion represented institutional acknowledgement of her capabilities and professional value. The promotion ceremony was attended by senior officers from throughout the Regional Intelligence Center, reflecting the respect she had earned through her analytical work and training development. General Mitchell personally presented her promotion warrant, acknowledging her transformation from tactical operator to strategic intelligence specialist. "Your work has enhanced our intelligence capabilities throughout this theater of operations," Mitchell said during the ceremony. "The training protocols you've developed are being implemented across multiple commands, and your analytical methodologies are improving the effectiveness of reconnaissance operations region-wide." The recognition represented vindication of Maria's decision to act independently when institutional processes had failed to adequately address time-sensitive intelligence. Her unauthorized communication had led not only to successful tactical operations but to systemic improvements that were benefiting military effectiveness across the entire theater. The letter of reprimand that had been placed in her personnel file was formally removed 18 months after the incident, reflecting the exceptional value of her subsequent contributions to intelligence operations. The disciplinary action had served its institutional purpose while allowing her career to progress based on demonstrated performance. Maria's new position as Senior Training Specialist for Reconnaissance Intelligence Operations gave her responsibility for developing capabilities that would enhance military effectiveness for years to come. Her work was influencing how the military approached tactical intelligence collection and analysis in complex operational environments. The analytical techniques she had developed during her tactical assignments were being incorporated into standard operating procedures for reconnaissance teams throughout the military. Her pattern recognition methodologies and threat assessment protocols were becoming institutional knowledge that would benefit future soldiers facing similar challenges. 2 years after the surveillance mission that had nearly ended her career, Maria stood before a class of reconnaissance soldiers at the Intelligence Center's training facility. Her students included Rangers, Special Forces operators, and conventional forces personnel who were learning the analytical techniques that had made her exceptional as a tactical intelligence specialist. The lesson she was teaching focused on threat pattern recognition and the importance of human observation in modern intelligence operations. Her examples drew from real-world experiences, including the surveillance mission that had changed her career trajectory and demonstrated the value of tactical intelligence in preventing enemy operations. "Intelligence analysis is not just about collecting information," she explained to the attentive class. "It's about understanding what that information means in context and communicating your assessment effectively to people who can act on it. Your job is to see what others miss and to ensure that your observations reach the right people at the right time." The students in her class represented the future of military intelligence operations, and her teaching was preparing them to face the complex challenges that characterized modern conflict environments. Her emphasis on analytical rigor, communication effectiveness, and moral courage reflected the lessons she had learned through her own experiences. Chen, who had been promoted to staff sergeant, attended one of Maria's advanced classes as part of his professional development. His growth as an intelligence analyst had been significantly influenced by her mentoring, and his appreciation for her teaching reflected the broader impact she was making on military capabilities. "Your instruction completely changed how I approach intelligence analysis," he told her after the class. "The techniques you taught me during that deployment have made me a much more effective analyst, and I've been sharing those methods with other soldiers in my unit." The mentoring relationship that had begun during a routine reconnaissance mission had evolved into a professional legacy that was influencing intelligence operations across multiple units. Maria's impact extended far beyond her individual contributions to include the development of capabilities in dozens of other soldiers. Her work at the Intelligence Center had also attracted attention from civilian intelligence agencies and military commands in other theaters of operations. The analytical methodologies she had developed were being adapted for use in different geographical and cultural environments, demonstrating their broader applicability. The training protocols Maria had created were being implemented in intelligence schools throughout the military education system, ensuring that future reconnaissance soldiers would receive formal instruction in the analytical techniques that had previously been developed only through field experience. Her work was becoming part of the institutional knowledge base that would enhance military effectiveness for generations. Maria's career had been transformed by a single decision to prioritize mission accomplishment over procedural compliance, but her subsequent success reflected capabilities that extended far beyond that moment of moral courage. Her analytical skills, teaching abilities, and commitment to developing others had created value that justified the institutional investment in her potential. The recognition she had received included not only promotion and professional assignments, but also respect from peers and superiors who understood the difficulty of what she had accomplished. Her transformation from dismissed subordinate to respected subject matter expert demonstrated the military's capacity to recognize and develop exceptional talent when institutional barriers were overcome. 5 years after the surveillance mission that had tested her resolve, Maria received orders for assignment to the Pentagon, where she would work with strategic intelligence organizations developing doctrine for tactical intelligence operations. The assignment represented the culmination of a career transformation that had begun with unauthorized action under pressure. Her departure from the Regional Intelligence Center was marked by ceremonies that acknowledged her contributions to intelligence operations throughout the theater. The training program she had developed would continue to influence military effectiveness long after her departure, creating a professional legacy that extended far beyond her individual service. The Pentagon assignment would give Maria responsibility for developing intelligence doctrine that would influence military operations worldwide. Her tactical experience and analytical expertise would be applied to strategic challenges that affected global military effectiveness and national security interests. The officer evaluation reports that documented her performance consistently described her as an exceptional analyst and trainer whose contributions had enhanced intelligence capabilities throughout her command. The institutional recognition of her value represented complete vindication of her decision to act independently when circumstances demanded immediate action. As Maria prepared for her new assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from dismissed tactical operator to strategic intelligence specialist. The unauthorized communication that had nearly ended her career had instead created opportunities that she could never have anticipated when she made that difficult decision during a 12-hour surveillance mission. Her story had become part of the institutional memory at the Intelligence Center, where her example was used to teach students about the importance of analytical rigor, moral courage, and effective communication in intelligence operations. The lessons learned from her experience were being incorporated into training programs that would influence military effectiveness for decades. The respect she had earned from peers and subordinates reflected not just her analytical capabilities, but also her commitment to developing others and sharing knowledge that enhanced overall unit effectiveness. Her mentoring had influenced dozens of soldiers who were now applying her techniques in their own assignments throughout the military. Maria's career had demonstrated that exceptional performance could overcome institutional barriers, and that moral courage in support of mission accomplishment would ultimately be recognized and rewarded. Her transformation from underestimated subordinate to respected leader provided a model for other soldiers facing similar challenges in hierarchical organizations. The final administrative tasks associated with her transfer included completing training materials that would be used by her replacement and documenting analytical procedures that had become standard practice at the Intelligence Center. Her work would continue to influence military intelligence operations long after her departure for Washington. The young woman who had been dismissed and underestimated during a routine reconnaissance mission had proven that competence, courage, and commitment could overcome institutional prejudice and create opportunities for exceptional achievement. Her story reflected both personal triumph and institutional progress in recognizing and developing talent, regardless of traditional barriers. As Maria boarded the flight that would take her to her new assignment, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that her unauthorized decision had not only saved lives, but had also created systemic improvements that would benefit military operations for years to come. Her choice to do the right thing when it was difficult and dangerous had been validated by outcomes that exceeded her most optimistic expectations. The reconnaissance mission that had tested her resolve had become the foundation for a career that would influence intelligence operations at the highest levels of military command. Her story demonstrated that individual courage and competence could create change that extended far beyond personal achievement to enhance institutional effectiveness and save lives in complex operational environments. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.